Enemy in the Fort by Sarah Masters Bucky. Prologue. Attacked. Spring 1752. Rebecca Percy peered into the darkness, listening, wondering. Moments before she had been lost in deep sleep. Now her eyes were wide opened. What had awakened her? It wasn't her younger sister, Celinda. She lay asleep, tightly curled beside Rebecca in the narrow bed they shared. It wasn't the dawn. Looking out the attic window near their bed, Rebecca could see that the moon had set, but the sun had not yet begun to rise. Stars were sprinkled across the spring sky. They blinked like cat's eyes peering out from the darkness. Far, far away. Perhaps 'twas the wind that woke me, Rebecca thought. A chilling wind was blowing down from Canada through the forests of northern New England. Rebecca could hear leaves shuffle and branches creak in the wind. Somewhere in the woods a wolf howled mournfully. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. A gust of wind chilled the attic loft and gave Rebecca goosebumps. She lay back in bed and tugged on the quilt, but it wouldn't budge. Celinda had wound herself in the bed cover like a spindle wrapped in thread. Carefully, Rebecca unwound her sister and arranged the quilt so that it covered them both. She was about to nestle her head in her feather pillow when she heard a snarl from downstairs. It was Virgil, the Percy's big black and white watchdog. He was pacing the length of the cabin's main room, and he was growling a deep, threatening growl. Rebecca started up in bed again. Could something or someone be outside? Her parents must have awakened too, for now Rebecca could hear them whispering to each other and moving about downstairs. She heard her father, Josiah Percy, lift his musket from the two pegs where it hung above the front door. Rebecca crept out of bed and over to the edge of the sleeping loft, where she could peer down at her parents. Embers from the evening's fire still glowed in the fireplace. Rebecca could see that her father had pulled on his breeches and was looking out a crack between the window shutters. Virgil was pacing in front of the cabin door, like a soldier on sentry duty. His sharp claws scratched against the wide wooden planks of the floor. "Mama," Rebecca called down softly. She was careful not to wake Celinda, or their baby brother Benjamin, who slept in a cradle near their parents' bed. "What is it?" Mama looked up toward the loft. She was a small, energetic woman with dark eyes and brown curls that reached past her waist. She had thrown a shawl over her night shift. "Hush, child," she whispered. Then she turned to her husband. "Should we hasten to the fort, Josiah?" she asked in a low tone. It must be Indians, Rebecca thought. Fort Number 4, about a quarter-mile away, had been built to protect the English colonists from the Indians. Whenever there was threat of attack, the Percys and other families could take shelter inside the fort. Now Rebecca watched her father anxiously, waiting for his decision. She saw him shake his head, then put a finger to his lips. With a shock, Rebecca realized it might be too late for the family to escape to the fort. Indians could be somewhere close by, maybe even in the farmyard. Suddenly, Virgil's growl turned to furious barking. He charged at the front door as if he would rip it from its hinges. Awakened by the dog, baby Benjamin started to cry, a loud, insistent bawling. "Rebecca, fetch your sister," Mama whispered, "and you both come down. Now." Rebecca hurried to the bed that she shared with Celinda. "Wake up. Mama says to come downstairs." "What?" Celinda mumbled. "Is it morning?" "No, but—" Rebecca paused. She didn't want to frighten her sister, but she had to hurry. "It might be Indians." "Rebecca, Celinda," Mama's voice was quiet but urgent. "Come quick." Rebecca scrambled down the ladder to the main room, and Celinda, who walked with a limp, followed close behind. Their mother was standing by the trap door that led to the Percy's root cellar. Usually a blue rag rug covered the door, but Mama had pushed the rug aside. Now she pulled open the door. "Hide in here," she told the girls. "Hurry." Rebecca protested. "But, Mama—" Papa glanced away from the window. He was a big, broad-shouldered man who often laughed with his daughters and told them merry stories. But tonight he looked deadly serious. "Mind your mother," he ordered in a low voice, "and don't say a word no matter what you hear. Understand?" Rebecca nodded. "Yes, sir," she whispered. Celinda, still dazed from sleep, looked bewildered. "Mama, what about you?" she asked. "And Ben?" "The savages would hear Ben's crying," Mama whispered. "I must stay with your father. You girls hide together. And remember, be quiet." Both girls knew that when Mama made up her mind, there was no point arguing. Celinda climbed down the cellar ladder, then crouched down on the cellar floor, her skinny arms wrapped around her knees. Rebecca followed her sister. Her bare feet had just touched the cellar's chilly floor when Mama called to her softly. "Becca!" She looked up. Mama was leaning over the trapdoor entrance. In her hand she held the family's most prized possession, a pair of silver spoons. The beautiful engraved spoons had belonged to Mama's mother. They had been brought all the way from England when Mama was a little girl. Ever since Rebecca could remember, the two spoons had been kept in a special box underneath Mama and Papa's bed. They were taken out only on very special occasions. Now Mama reached down low and handed the precious spoons to Rebecca. "Here," she said, her dark eyes looking straight into Rebecca's. "Keep these and watch over your sister. I'm counting on you." Mama bit her lip, as if she wanted to say more, but could not trust herself. Abruptly, she stood up and closed the trapdoor. The two sisters heard a heavy whoosh as their mother dragged the rug over the entrance. They huddled together in the small, pitch-black cellar. It was cold and damp, and it smelled of parsnips and potatoes. Rebecca felt her sister begin to tremble. She put her arm around Celinda's bony shoulders and pulled her close. They could hear the dog barking and baby Benjamin's insistent crying, but for several minutes that was all they could hear. Then there was a loud pounding on the door, followed by the crash of the cabin door bursting open. Vigil's barking grew even more ferocious. There was a scuffle somewhere above their heads and a terrible thud. Then Virgil was silent. "What?" Celinda whispered. Rebecca clamped her hand over her sister's mouth. "Shh!" Terrified, the girls listened to the tromping of feet above them. They heard Indians shouting commands. Then they heard Papa's voice. Josiah Percy sometimes traded with his Abenaki Indian neighbors, and he spoke little of their language. Now he sounded calm, as if he were trying to make a deal with the men who had invaded his home. But the Indian seemed angry. Rebecca could hear banging and crashing above her head. Baby Benjamin continued his wild wailing. Mrs. Percy spoke to her son in a loud, clear voice that rose above the din. "Don't cry, Angel. We must go with these men, but we'll be all right. The Lord will watch over us, and someday we'll come back here. You must be quiet now." "Why does Mama speak in such a way to Benjamin?" Rebecca wondered in confusion. "He's only a baby. He can't understand." Then Rebecca understood. Mama wasn't really talking to Benjamin at all. She meant her words to be overheard by her daughters. The Indians were taking Mama, Papa, and Benjamin away, and she and Celinda were to stay hidden until they were gone. Rebecca clenched Celinda tightly. She felt her sister's body heave with silent sobbing. Footsteps hurried above them, sometimes right over their heads. One moment Rebecca was terrified that their hiding place would be discovered, and the Indians would capture them. Then she was terrified that she and Celinda would be left alone. Without Mama and Papa, what would they do? In the cabin above them, a man issued what sounded like a command. Then, almost as quickly as they had arrived, the Indians left, taking Mama, Papa, and Benjamin as their prisoners. Suddenly the cabin was quiet. For Rebecca, the silence was even more horrible than the raid. She recalled the many tales she'd heard of Indian attacks. After the Indians took their prisoners, they often returned to set fire to the captives' farms. She leaned over to whisper in her sister's ear, "Celinda, we must get away from here." As Rebecca moved, the spoons jangled in her lap. "Hold these," she said. She handed the spoons to Celinda. Then she climbed up to the trapdoor and put her ear to it. There was no sound above. Holding onto the ladder with one hand, she pushed with her free hand, but the door did not yield. "What if we can't get out?" she thought in a panic. "Will this be our grave?" Bracing her feet against the ladder, Rebecca used both hands to push as hard as she could. The heavy wooden door swung open, with the rug dangling above it. "Come quickly," she whispered to Celinda. Together the girls emerged from the cellar. Celinda gasped. Their home had been ransacked. Mama and Papa's bed had been torn apart, and the table was upended. All of Mama's tidy housekeeping was destroyed. Rebecca grabbed her sister's arm. "Hurry! We'll hide in fairyland!" She pulled Celinda out the broken door and dragged her across the yard to the small cluster of pine trees they had long ago named Fairyland. Between the trees, the ground dipped in a deep hollow. It was a sheltered spot only a few dozen yards from the cabin, and it had always been one of their favorite places to play. When they reached the pine-scented hollow, they peered out into the shadows of the surrounding woods. "Look," whispered Celinda. She pointed toward the edge of the farmyard. 2 Indian men carrying torches were coming toward the cabin. "Be quiet," Rebecca hissed. "Don't say a word or they'll find us." The Indians set fire to the Percy's home and barn, then retreated back into the northern woods. Horrified, the 2 girls watched as flames shot up from their farmstead. Waves of heat spread from the blaze, and the girls almost choked from the thick smoke. Then, over the cracking of burning timbers, Rebecca heard the boom of the great gun from Fort Number 4. "They've sighted the smoke," she whispered to Celinda. The soldiers will be here soon." By the time the soldiers from the fort arrived, dawn was streaking the sky. Percy's house was a mass of smoking ashes. Only parts of the cabin's floor and a few charred logs of the foundation remained. It was Captain Phineas Stevens, the commander of Fort Number 4, who found the girls in their hiding place. "Come out," he told them. His face looked stern, but his voice was kind. "The Indians are gone." Rebecca wanted to cry, but the tears would not come. She felt as if someone had put a cork in her heart, and her feelings were stuck inside. She stood up and held out her hand for her sister. "Come, Celinda. We must go." Celinda did not answer. She sat motionless in the hollow, one hand clutching the silver spoons. Her eyes looked as blank as 2 brown buttons. "Please, Celinda," Rebecca pleaded. Still, Celinda did not move. Without a word, Captain Stevens stepped down into the hollow. Gently he picked Celinda up and carried her to his horse. She dropped on the saddle like a rag doll. "I'll take you to the fort," the captain told Rebecca, as he helped her onto the horse behind her sister. "You'll be safe there, and I wager you'll be able to stay with Widow Tyler for a while. At least till we can find you another home." "What about Mama and Papa and Ben?" Rebecca protested. "The savages took them captive. We must help them." Captain Stevens shook his head. "All we can do now is wait and pray that the Abenakis will trade your family back to us someday, either for money or for Indians we've taken prisoner." He shook his head sadly. "Just wait and pray." He tugged on his horse's reins, and they started off through the dark forest toward the fort. As they rode away, Rebecca turned to look at the smoldering ruins that had once been her home. "I'll never forgive those savages," she vowed. "Not as long as I live."